The question that you start asking yourself is like, how do I not lose sight of myself fundamentally as a human being when and if I start putting out this thing that's so close to me, and in the hopes that I can like monetize off of it. Hi, welcome back to my channel. Sit down, strap in, grab a snack. Let's talk. I've recently been seeing a lot of discussion lately about how difficult it is to sell manuscripts these days. I've not been in traditional publishing long enough to have an opinion about whether it's gotten harder, if it used to be easier back in the day. Like, I just got here. I have been agented for about a year. I signed with my literary agent a year ago. It feels like longer, to be honest, because in that period of time, we revised my manuscript 5 times, and then we went on submission and we were on sub for 5 or 6 months. And yeah, it's felt like longer. Another reason it's probably felt long is because writing is just like one of those things that a lot of us start very early on in life, and it's not something that you make money from if you started as a kid. I know a lot of people write just for fun, and that's just something that is like a creative outlet for them. I think I knew it from a pretty young age, though, that I did want to publish. Maybe that's like another reason why the journey has felt long. It's hard to sell books, and it can feel very, very bleak for a lot of us who are just starting out in publishing, because we've put all this work into our craft for however many years, and all of the things that you start hearing about the industry, you're like, what the frick? Is it even worth it? And I think that's also part of why so many writers feel like they're behind. You know, I'm seeing 18, 19, 20-year-old writers who are like, I'm so behind, I'm never gonna get published. And it's like, your frontal lobe hasn't even finished developing, like, you're fine. But also, I don't want to invalidate those feelings, because it can feel like you are behind. There's so many systemic barriers in the industry. It's a hard industry to break into, as for those of us who don't have the financial means, the time, the connections, you know, all of these things. All of these things make it doubly, triply hard to break into the industry. I also, a while back, was reading Susan Dennard's newsletter. I can't remember which newsletter it was. It was a while ago now, but she was like mentioning how even she has writer friends, writer colleagues who she's seeing, you know, they've been in this industry for a while. They are having a hard time selling books, great manuscripts, and with other books under their belts. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about book talk and book talk trends and making your book go viral, what that means for writers who are writing outside of these very narrow trends and are now feeling forced to write to a trend, feeling very discouraged. If you follow publishing at all, if you follow any writers, and you might be seeing like there's a lot of romantasy book deals. I also see people saying that book royalties are pennies, that most authors, their advances don't earn out. Craziest thing is I saw a TikTok recently from an author who, I don't know how long ago she debuted, but apparently this her debut novel, didn't hit whatever sales numbers that the publisher wanted or expected. And so her agent warned her that selling another book would be quite hard, because publishers are going to look at the numbers and be like, I don't know if we should invest in you. You're basically telling authors they need to have viral hits, bestsellers out of the gate. It's like how all of these TV shows are now only getting 1 season. Are we not allowed to have writers grow into their success? Imagine if writers were only allowed to write 1 book, and that book had to determine their entire career. So a lot of writers would talk about how much debut book sales matter. Your career like hinges on your debut book sales. A crazy amount of pressure to put on writers who are like just starting out in this industry. For me personally, like, I feel like my best stories haven't been written yet. Like, I'm only 26. Oh my God, I was about to say 25. I turned 26 last month. It's not old, but apparently it's like you can feel old because of all of this emphasis on like young success or younger success. I should say I'm only 26, and to think that the stories that I am writing now are going to be the ones that like determine the rest of my career, like, I don't want that. I feel like I have so much to learn and to grow into. The point is that there's always a consistent wave of things that I feel like I learn and hear about publishing that make me reevaluate my life on a weekly basis, monthly basis, it depends. And so when you hear these things, it can make you feel like juvenile or naive for wanting to pursue writing in any way, whether it's just to write for fun or whether it's to try and publish. I was inspired to kind of revisit this topic, I guess, because I was watching a video from one of my new favorite creators. Her name is Rinny Apple. She's an illustrator. She's a webcomic artist. She had this really like enriching and nourishing discussion about, you know, the constant balance that creatives have to make in their lives between money, making enough to live, and wanting to spend more time creating and making art that's meaningful to them. And I also think it's just sad that art is something that everyone consumes in some way, shape, or form. We all have art in our lives in whatever medium that has really made an impact on us, has affected us. We all have those stories that we love. It's something that we all find value in, but there's so little support for it. Seen as, you know, wanting to pursue it is seen as something that's like frivolous. After watching Rinny Apple's video, you know, where she talks about why she works so hard on her art, even if she's not making any money from it at the moment, I wanted to kind of expand the discussion and I guess just talk about what that feels like for me as a writer, and just kind of give my perspective on it. I will link her video down below so you guys can watch it if you want to. As some of you know, because I was vlogging that week, I have been out of the corporate grind for just over a month now. We're coming up on my second month, and that's the longest that I have been not working since I've been a university student. So I graduated in 2020. And I've worked in corporate, I've worked in tech specifically, basically for the last like 4 or 5 years. I also did like internships while I was a student. Had so much of my identity tied to whatever my full-time job was. Most of, actually all of my job positions since university has been as a designer. We all tie our identity to our jobs. Like whenever we introduce ourselves, it's always like, what's your name? How old are you? What's your job? What's your occupation? We're obviously conditioned to tie our worth as like human beings to our occupation, our productivity. As a teenager / university student, and by the way, like I was raised by first generation immigrant parents, so education and success, setting yourself up for a career that will make you a lot of money. I'm not sure that my parents wanted me to become a writer, but I think they always knew that I was not going to be the engineering STEM kid, because I literally I grew up in the bookstore. Yeah, I should say my parents are very supportive of my writing. I know makes me quite privileged, because for them, you know, all of this work that I put into my books, they've never asked me why do you work so hard on your books? Stop working so hard on your books. They've always known that it's something that I've wanted to do ever since I was a kid. So that's something that I'm very privileged to have, is that kind of familial support. But I should say that when I was in university, I had a lot of career goals for myself. Sometimes I like to think of myself as a recovering ladder climber, because I remember when I was 19 or 20, and coming up on the end of my degree, I'm I want to have, if not a 6-figure job, then I want to be making a senior UX designer salary, or I want to be a senior UX designer by the time I'm 25 or whatever. Those were the kinds of goals that I had for myself. You know, it was kind of the girl boss era. I did have those kind of career ambitions. Then I graduated into the year of 2020. Not a great year to graduate into. Don't really recommend it. Obviously, COVID hits. My career goals begin to shift. My values begin to shift. And that was a huge thing for me, because I was who am I outside of just a student, outside of just career goals? Like many people, I had this urge to return to childhood passions, things that you're told you shouldn't pursue because it's not going to make you money, thus it's not worth investing in. First sort of stages of lockdown, I realized that I did not want to give up my dream of being a published author. Let's figure out what it actually takes to be a published author, and let's start writing books, because look at all this time I have. And I was working during the pandemic, technically graduated, did not have convocation, obviously, but I graduated in April. By June, I was working. I had like a remote job, and that contract finished. I immediately had another contract, and then I went into like a full-time job, and that's what I did for 3 years. Because it was remote work, I saved a lot of time by not commuting. I wanted to use that time to just really focus on my writing. And as I did, I realized without a doubt, this is what I want to do out of my life. This is the thing that gives me purpose. Yeah, but I got very serious about my writing in those years. 2021, I started this YouTube channel. Obviously, since then, I've written 3 books. I got an agent. We went on sub. I have more news that I can't talk about right now, but the last 3-4 years have just been crazy. And so I'm making all of these strides, and I'm accomplishing these writing milestones. I'm proud of that, but it's also like you start to feel the doubt about how realistic it is for me to like stay in this industry, truly be like a full-time writer. How financially viable is it? My biggest fear as a writer who is now writing full-time without a corporate job, with the hopes that my writing will eventually sustain me, I'm afraid of resenting my work. You're a lot more dependent on the external factors that decide a work's value. And it's really scary to think that I might completely lose the joy of storytelling because of the burden of having to write something that sells, and that being the guiding principle, and not necessarily creating because I want to create. I find that, every time you do research on what does it take to be a full-time writer, you'll find that most authors are A, not writing full-time, B, they are being supported by a family or a spouse or whatever, or C, they're already financially secure or they're rich, and so it allows them to like go an extended period of time without working until they do make enough money. In order to even make it to the doorstep of publishing, it requires a lot of time. And like I said, like I've always considered myself pretty lucky. Even the fact that I can take a little bit of time off from working, just not immediately be on the street, is because of family support and savings. Not just having financial support, but having emotional support. Like that's another privilege that a lot of people don't factor in. Sometimes I still think to myself, like, would my life change for the better if I didn't work so hard on my writing? If I didn't care so much about publishing, like, would I still be happy if I just gave it all up? And the answer is, I don't know. Because becoming a full-time writer was not my choice. I was affected by layoffs. Layoffs are happening a lot right now, especially in tech. It's still pretty difficult when you're blindsided because it really does just come out of nowhere, and corporate America is a baffling place. Let's just say that. Corporate America is a baffling place could be the marketing copy for local heavens. The book that I finished writing most recently. Yeah, it's my cyberpunk novel. It deals a lot with like who and what falls through the cracks of eroding social structures and extrapolating different facets of technology and capitalism. Like obviously life experience and what you write tend to go hand in hand for many writers, and that's where the most fulfilling and resonant stories can come from, are writing about things that you have experienced firsthand or that you feel very emotionally connected to, that you feel like you have a lot to say about. For me, when I was writing Local Heavens, it was like a lot of me like working in tech, but then also writing about like the disillusionments of how someone can like define success in their life, trying to figure out like what does that success ultimately mean and cost. And I think that's why I threw so much of myself into that book. Like you're writing because you like physically can't stop writing. But layoffs, getting back to layoffs, even the kindest and smoothest process is like, it's gonna suck. I really liked my coworkers. That was the longest job that I'd ever had coming out of graduating. And I think I was ultimately still very fortunate to have had that experience. The entire process of being laid off will always feel, no matter what, it'll always feel somewhat dehumanizing. Because you're losing your livelihood in an instant, basically. I know that my writing has always been fueled by trying to make sense of and find catharsis, I should say, in my own anxieties and my own insecurities. And it's very difficult to imagine a world in which I'm not a writer, but publishing stress, it's made me reconsider that. It's made me reconsider like who I could be if I wasn't a writer. It's made me reevaluate how far I am willing to push myself. When I think back on Local Heavens specifically, I bring it up because it was sort of like the turning point book for me, because I had written 2 manuscripts before that, but this was the book that I felt passionately enough about that I wanted to risk my own spirit and put it out there into the world. I know that book is shaped so much by what I was feeling between the years like 2020 and into 2022. I know that I had to write it. Like, I've had my ups and downs with this manuscript, but I know for a fact that like these were the ideas that were keeping me up at night. I needed to put those emotions somewhere. Local Heavens is a Gatsby retelling. It's a cyberpunk Gatsby retelling. People always ask me like, why'd you write this book? Like, what was your inspiration behind it? And I feel like it was honestly just like, I thought it was interesting. You have this book, The Great Gatsby, that is so regarded as like the epitome of the Roaring 20s, and graduating into the 2020s, it's like our Roaring 20s gave us a global pandemic, a cost of living crisis, a climate crisis, and all these things. And it was just interesting to think that our generation's Roaring 20s, it's so different than how we look back and romanticize the 1920s. I think that's what ultimately led me to write a cyberpunk reimagining of The Great Gatsby in a, sci-fi dystopia, reinterrogating the American dream. But I've always considered myself someone who doesn't like to be cynical. Like, I want to be a hopeful and sincere person. And I feel like I've always had a very romanticized view of the world, especially as a child. Well, I guess a lot of us do have childlike wonder, and then it just gets like crushed. I think I've always wanted to retain a lot of that romanticism that we all have as children, and I sometimes think that I was predisposed to becoming a writer, and specifically a speculative fiction writer, because I always wanted to believe that the world was secretly weirder and fantastical than it is. And to me, Local Heavens was about exploring what it means to try and break free from your apathy, the cynicisms that might be unconsciously eating away at you, and what it takes to not just survive in a fundamentally broken, cruel world, but to feel that you can still find meaning in that world. What would it take to rekindle your hope and your humanity? I think I wrote that story so fervently because I wanted to claw my way towards the same journey. I wanted to believe it was possible to find that faith again and that meaning in my life, because I was going through this process of I didn't want to spend my whole life climbing a corporate ladder in the way that I once thought I did. At first, I wrote the book not thinking it would go anywhere. It was like my unhinged project. We all deserve to have our unhinged projects. And I was told, publishing doesn't want sci-fi. But, I wrote it anyway, and here we are. I think once you start entering the realm of traditional publishing, the question that you start asking yourself is like, how do I not lose sight of myself fundamentally as a human being when and if I start putting out this thing that's so close to me, and in the hopes that I can like monetize off of it? I personally have had, over the last few years, but especially in the last year, a very difficult year in terms of my mental health. And it's not just because of publishing stress. Of course, that is a factor, but it's more than that. And to be honest, it's been something that I've tried not to think about too deeply. But the thing is, if you ignore it, and the longer that you ignore it, and you just like pretend it's not there, it can't hurt you, it will manifest physically. And that's something that I've learned this year. I've had to come to terms with the fact that I can't be an exception to burnout. Like, unfortunately, I too can get burned out, and I'm not immune to symptoms of anxiety and depression, no matter how hard I want it to be, and I really want it to be. And I think I spent a lot of my time like gaslighting myself to thinking that like I'm totally fine. Spent a lot of time this summer in and out of doctor's offices. Very thankful to have socialized healthcare in this country, because yeah, I spent a lot of time going to the doctor, and I can't imagine what that would have been like if I had to pay for that. Like, to see a doctor, to do tests, to see a specialist. It's just like access to that kind of like preventative medical care is life-saving. I don't know where I'd be if I hadn't had access to that. Point is, this all does have to do with being a writer, because I think in order to have writing be something that is not just financially sustainable, but also spiritually and mentally sustainable, there are so many external factors, like being able to make sure that your mind and body are in a good enough place to work on your art. Again, having that family support, not being put into crippling debt in order to take care of yourself. I usually end these kinds of videos by saying, I don't want to give up on writing. I would never give up on writing. But even though it's true, I don't want to give up on writing. Also keep trying to find ways to remind myself that like writing isn't all that I am. And as much as I care about my art, it's also like not necessarily like the only thing that makes my life valuable. It's like never too late to reorient yourself. I am proud of what I've accomplished so far in the last like 4 years. I think that comparing ourselves to our past self is more productive than comparing ourselves to other people. Having made so many writer friends and acquaintances, and having a really supportive literary agent and other writing milestones that I can't share right now, but I will share eventually. I think the goalpost is always moving as a writer, right? We reach one goal and then we're like, oh, okay, now I want this, now I want this. I think when we're so focused on that goalpost that is constantly moving, we never really focus on ourselves and how much we have accomplished. Social media is a highlight reel, but our successes are sometimes just like 1% of our actual full journey. And I think, I've always been terrified of disappointment and getting my hopes too high, which stops me from enjoying writing itself a lot of the time. Like, I feel like a fraud 90% of the time. Maybe that's something that doesn't necessarily come through in my videos, but I do. Absolutely no idea how people will ever react to my stories, how people perceive me as a person, the extrapolations that people might make about you, your personality, your art. Are my stories interesting enough? Are my stories worthy enough to be shared? And that's just the devil on my shoulder, I guess. When I was watching Rinny Apple's video and just thinking about that question of why am I working so hard on something that isn't currently making me money, it just got me thinking about how do I protect my relationship with my art? How do I ensure that the value I place in my work isn't ever reduced entirely to numbers and belittled based on those numbers? And, obviously other people are going to belittle your work, but how do I make sure that I don't belittle my work? And again, who am I outside of my writing, and how can I keep working hard and keep feeling fulfilled in the creative process, even when I experience the worst of publishing's cruelties? I don't have that answer. I don't know if I ever will fully have that answer, but this whole entire channel, I think, is in many ways my constant search for that answer. We're all kind of going on our writing journeys together. That's all I want to talk about today. Thank you for watching. Thank you for hanging out. Check out Rinny Apple's video if you want to. And as always, you can support me, this channel, through my Ko-fi community. I'm very, very thankful to have connected with all the writers that I've been able to connect with through this channel. And I'm very appreciative of all of you guys. So I hope all your writing projects are going well. And I'll see you guys in the next video.